pleased to introduce to you our new Managing Director, Ms. Kristalina Georgieva. And as you know, she is history, because Kristalina is the first emerging market candidate to lead the IMF, and in fact to lead any of the Bretton Woods institutions. And we are very proud and pleased to have her with us tonight. So this is going to be a very informal session. You all know Kristalina very well as someone who's been totally committed to the developing countries, to reduction of poverty, and to the voice of civil society. So I think her presence here tonight speaks to that issue. I told Kristalina earlier that you had a very good session, many of you, yesterday with our executive directors, and I know you've had many interesting events and fora here during these meetings, and I also know that tonight is a bit of a highlight. So the last thing I want to say is please, and please, can you keep your questions short? Because if you can, we'll take as many as we possibly can. But please, this is not the time for speeches, long statements, but punchy comments, punchy questions, whatever you want to say, let's hear it, but let it be short. So with that, I want to ask Kristalina to kick us off with a few remarks, and then we will get to your questions and comments.
Okay, thank you.
Kristalina.
Actually, can I stand up and kind of walk around? Would that be okay?
Please do.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you. Some may know me from my days at the World Bank, and actually, in addition to being the first emerging market national to lead the fund, I realized that I might stay in history for quite some time as being the one person that was interim president of the World Bank, in other words, led the World Bank, as he's now managing director of the IMF, building a bridge across the two institutions. For those who do not know me, I am a Bulgarian national, grew up on the other side of the Iron Curtain until Mr. Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union, and Glasnost allowed people like me, I was in academia, to apply directly for scholarships. In my case, I won a British Council scholarship, and I went to London School of Economics in 87, 88. That was incredibly important because just 2 years later, the Iron Curtain fell, and my country had to take this very tough transition road from central planning to market. And I was with a bit of advantage. I wrote the first microeconomics textbook to help Bulgarian students learn what the market economy is. I co-authored the first macroeconomics textbook. And what was remarkable about this, because I had to write it for people who had no clue what is price mechanism, demand, supply, I wrote it very, very simply. So up to that very day, people in Bulgaria like to study from my very simple textbook. Then I came to MIT. The World Bank recruited me as an environmental economist. The year was 1992, which we would remember with, let's see how many of you follow environment. What was the must? With Rio. So the World Bank made the commitment in Rio to increase the number of environmentalists by 100, and I was one of those lucky 100 to be hired by the bank. I had the most amazing professional life at the bank because I was able to work on technical issues, but then to become a manager. Then I was director for environment. I was country director for Russia, based in Moscow. I came back. I was vice president, corporate secretary. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, one night, the phone rang. And it was the Bulgarian Prime Minister who said, Kristalina, we are in trouble, and we need our biggest gun. I felt very special. Bulgaria's candidate to be commissioner failed in the hearing in the European Parliament, and I left the bank, went to be a commissioner. And I want to tell you that being commissioner for humanitarian aid, later on I was vice president in charge of budget and human resources, but being commissioner for humanitarian aid is the job that made me a better person, because I would face the most tragic, horrible crisis caused by the evil of man, by conflicts, or by force of nature. And I would see firsthand how resilient people are, and how, when we talk about international assistance and this and that, but who helps you in your gravest moment of need? It is your neighbor, it is your family, it is the people next to you. So then I came back to the bank, called me. That's in my life, a lot of calling happens. So bank called me. I came back as CEO, and I had a tremendous, almost 3 years job at the bank. I'm very proud that I helped the bank to be financially strong, and also the bank, the World Bank, to be more attuned with the needs of the most vulnerable people, especially those living in fragile states. And then, this time there was no phone call, actually. I got encouragement from many people from emerging markets to run for the European Commission. I ran. Sorry, for the IMF, I ran. I got the position, and I can tell you this is actually the honor of my life, because the IMF matters so much when it brings to bear good policies that improve people's lives. My aspiration for my colleagues and me is to always be zeroing on how what we do makes communities and economies stronger and improves the livelihoods of people. And I know that for many of you, this is not the immediate image of the fund, but under Christine Lagarde, who has done an exceptional job of leadership at the fund has embraced what technically is called macro-critical issues, like inequalities, like corruption, like climate, like gender. And what I want is to continue in Christine's tradition, to make the fund even more so an institution that very deeply cares about policies, sound policies that are a foundation of better opportunities and better lives everywhere. This is my 3rd week on the job, and I'm loving it. 2 things to share from these first weeks. One, the bad news. The world is slowing down. The world economy is slowing down. We had 2 years ago a world that was synchronized in an upswing. 70% by GDP was growing faster and faster. Today, more of the world, 90% of the world, is synchronized in a slowdown. In other words, majority of countries are still growing, most of them, but at a slower pace. And when you dig into why is this happening, there are many reasons. Some of them are man-made reasons, like trade disputes. My colleagues calculated that trade is chopping 0.8% of global GDP because of uncertainties. So that I can tell you, for what does it mean for us at the fund? It means to concentrate on supporting countries to weather a more turbulent couple of years ahead. We know it is difficult for everybody in a downturn, but it is particularly harsh for those that are already in difficulty, including some of the fund's program countries. Second, the good news. The fund surprised me with subject matters that, coming from the other side of 19th Street with my box with my stuff, I didn't expect to find at that level of quality. And in particular, it surprised me with work being done on climate. We just published, the fund published a new fiscal monitor concentrating on carbon tax as the most efficient way to drive low carbon growth. The fund surprised me with a very comprehensive work done, and I'm sure you contributed to that, on social spending, in the attention that is being paid to it. And the fund surprised me with the embracement of the fight against corruption, which, as we know, steals for people and most often from poor people. So I would be here for the next 4 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks. And I intend to make the best out of every single one. Those who know me know how much I care about listening to my own staff, to people in the countries, to you. I can promise you that I would listen to you. It doesn't mean we always would agree. There would be moments when we will not agree. But it would be always on the basis of fair, open, and mutually respectful engagement. And if there is anything that you know about our work that you believe I need to know, I would be always, always welcoming your comments, your criticism, you keeping my feet to the fire. Thank you. With this, let's open it for questions.
Okay, everyone, we have a microphone on each side. You can just start to head for the microphones. Again, please, this is the night for civil society, so we want civil society voices. But please, if you can, keep it as short as possible, and we'll try and take as many questions as possible. Thank you. Let's start with the lady. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Jerry. My name is Jo Marie Griesgraber. I'm with New Rules for Global Finance. And Kristalina, I would hope to encourage you to track how well mission chiefs implement all the good work the research department does on environment, gender, climate, all of the good things you mentioned. How well is it implemented? And then track the impact.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great comment.
Excellent comment. Thank you.
Shall we take a few, Kristalina?
Yes, we will take a couple. Maybe for fairness, we go this way and then this way.
Okay.
Sir.
Good evening. My name is Noel Carlo Bonzo. I'm originally from the Congo. Yeah, my question is, advanced countries make available information on taxes, returns, so that researchers and the public, civil society, of course, can access. But unfortunately, many developing countries do not make this information available. So what can you do to reinforce that?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I'm German Filko from Republic of Macedonia. I would like to ask you about what can fund do in countries like Macedonia with no arrangement to help us to fight corruption, which is widespread. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amer. I am from Jordan. I have a direct question to you. Do you have plans to empower women while you are making the history now to make history in fighting corruptions in the countries that we are receiving fund from you? This first part. Second part also can make history. Do you have plans to empower civil society in the countries receiving fund from you also to fight corruption and to make our countries more transparent? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take those and then we will continue. It is such a great beginning from your side to have somebody who comes and states very clearly where the shoe may not quite fit. And it is this transmission from research and policies to implementation in the programs. And the fund is not an exception. That is an institutional issue everywhere. I take your call very seriously. In fact, what I can tell you is that I have been here only 2 weeks, but I have met now with quite a number of mission chiefs. And my intention is to continue to reach directly. I know the mission chief for Egypt, the mission chief for Ecuador, the mission chief for Argentina. My intention is to be as engaged as possible with those who actually are on the front line implementing policies. For fairness to people, sometimes we drop new requirements with no support structure of training and then measuring implementation, and what you said that matters the most, measuring impact. And we will be, I don't have a good answer to you today, but I know that we would look into that very seriously. On the other side of the street, we actually did look into how we can move from inputs and spending money in bank loans to impacts and even more importantly, outcomes. Not an easy, you know, it's not an easy thing, but that is the culture we want to have. I'm a big believer in access to information. I personally came to work on environment because a member of my immediate family got sick, very seriously sick, due to groundwater pollution, completely avoidable if we had information, if we knew that the water was polluted. So whether it is physical pollution or it is the social pollution of corruption, what is the best way to deal with it? Sunshine, put it in the open. I can't see the person who asked the question. Where do you sit? The access to information question.
It was from the
I'm so sorry. I was looking over there. So the question of access to information is, one, to have that information available, right? To start from exposing it. And then two, to make it accessible to people that may not speak English or French for that matter, if it is disclosed in French. I don't know today, I cannot tell you today what we do and what we can do better. Maybe Jerry, maybe you can answer a little bit more on this question. But I can tell you that if we have policy changes that affect you and you have no way to know, we have a problem. And that is a problem we have to strive to address. Usually, it is the responsibility of the governments, of the authorities, to disclose to their citizens, but we have a responsibility to make sure this is actually done. And again, Jerry, if you want to add anything at a later point, please do. How can we help countries with countries that there are no arrangements? We actually do engage with the membership on a regular basis. In April 2018, the fund adopted through the board of directors a paper on anti-corruption. And it puts an obligation to the fund in its work everywhere, with or without programs. And again, I don't know enough to tell you today how well we are doing it in countries where there are no programs, no arrangements, but I take your point. It's an important point to follow up. Jordan. What would I do for empowerment of women? I would do three things. One, concentrate on where legal obstacles are most severe and make sure that these legal obstacles are identified and eliminated, and make this part of surveillance and of program work of the fund systematically. We do some of it, policy is there, but do it systematically. The Middle East, by and large, still is a bit behind. Globally, there are only 6 countries, by the way, where women are legally equal to men. Only 6 countries in the whole world. Who are Europeans here? So you can be proud, all 6 are European countries. In the Middle East, women have less than 50% on average, of the legal rights of men. Obviously, this is bad for women, but it is even worse for men, because then women don't participate in the labor force, they don't contribute, and it is difficult to have a vibrant middle class if you don't have women participating in the labor force. We also continue to look in things like unpaid work. Very surprisingly, the accordion among countries on the discrimination of women is unbelievable. So in Norway is the best country, where women do only 20% less unpaid work. Sorry, men do only 20% less unpaid work than women, only. In Japan, it is 380%. Women do 380% more unpaid work. In Pakistan, it is 1,000%. So how many minutes, how many seconds? Well, never mind. So what we would do, we will continue to do relentlessly, is to put out evidence as to why gender equality matters, where we are falling behind. That I promise you we will do. Secondly, we will work in our programs to bring more empowerment to women, especially in the part that concerns social spending. Educating girls, making sure that women have equal access to healthcare. All of this is in the area of reviewing social spending. 3, I will make sure that at the fund, we look like the world around us. Yes. Today, we don't quite yet. With no disrespect, Jerry. We have 24% women at the highest ranks, 25% at the next level. The lower you go in the pyramid, the higher the percentage of women. And actually we also have underrepresented nationalities. It is not just about women. But if we want to do the number 1 and number 2, I mentioned we have to start from ourselves, and that we will do. As of October, well, I'm not going to make announcements because this is, but okay, I started. As of October 1st, we absolutely categorically would not consider recruitment unless not only women are shortlisted, but at least one qualified woman is presented for final interviews. And you will see change. So, and of course, for civil society, I mean, the fund is a small organization. It is not big, but it has oversized influence on governments. And obviously, we are the amplifier of your voice when we can, to make sure that you have access to the high corridors of power. Which side was next?
You were talking about women.
Sir.
Ben Gorowski, New Rules for Global Finance too. I hope, since I consider risk-taking to be the oxygen of any development, I sure hope you will act a little bit like a Trojan horse coming in here, IMF, because excessive risk-take aversion has created huge overhangs, excessive exposures against too little capital to what's perceived safe. And we all know that all bank crisis, serious bank crisis, results from too large exposures to what's perceived safe. Never, ever from anything that was perceived risky.
Great point, great point. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shireen Talat from the MENA region. I heard you yesterday, and I am hearing you today. And your way of addressing things related to us as civil society give me hope. But let me form it as a question. Can someday the IMF have a mandate towards more citizen engagement, towards the civil society? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So first of all, wow, I was at the event, women event yesterday. So thank you for addressing all of that. My name is Sanpreet, and I work on AI for Good, and also an advisor on a $1 billion VC fund. So my question is, are we doing anything, or do we plan to do anything on the topic of AI for good? And the second question is that, is it a platform for women empowerment? Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you tell me a little bit more about AI for
AI, so artificial intelligence.
Ah, sorry.
So I work on
AI for good.
I work on AI for good, and there's so much confusion going on the topic of artificial intelligence, as you know. So, two parts of the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm here for a Brazilian youth empowerment organization called Global Attitude. And I wanted to know if embodying social conditionalities among economic conditionalities for lendings wouldn't be a useful tool for addressing issues such urgent as youth and women issues.
Yep, thank you.
Well, my name is Seema Chaturvedi. Thanks for this opportunity. I did not listen to the session yesterday, so my question is also about gender. I know in World Bank there was this V5 initiative. Ultimately, it's said that and there's a saying in Hindi, when you control wealth, you control some level of power, and if you control investing, how can we look at you to make investors out of women? Because women investors ultimately will bring a difference in the balance.
Yep.
And how can we engage as private citizens in that? Thank you.
Let me take those, and then we will continue. So I just take the point about excessive risk-taking seriously. The the reports we have produced for these meetings actually maybe not yet red, but they certainly blink yellow. There is more appetite for risky assets. Why? Because interest rates are low and there is search for yield. Sorry. And that worries us. We actually said $19 trillion maybe at risk because of this more excessive risk-taking. How we deal with it beyond signaling and giving policy recommendations, this is something that goes into the fund surveillance work. And it certainly needs, I mean, in the spirit of humbly learning from experience, we certainly need to pay more attention, not only at the global surveillance, but at the country level. Mandate for citizens' engagement. I don't know what exactly we have now at the fund? We have none? Okay. So obviously this is a learning I need to do and see. I mean, obviously at the World Bank, their policies and whatnot on the other side of 19th Street. I need to find out what we can do here, and whether the work that has been done on anti-corruption, for example, may be a good entry point in that regard. Because if you want to reduce corruption, who are your eyes and ears? Citizens. So I will follow up on that. I don't know much about this AI for good. So you got me. I don't know what. Is that something that the fund is doing? Or
I haven't heard about that.
Or it's in the. So I'm very sorry. I think we will have to have a side conversation, and I'm sure at the fund, among the super smart people we have, there would be somebody who would tell me what the answer is supposed to be. And then if you give me a card or something, I would have somebody from my office to send you the answer. The question from Brazil is a very, very important question. I actually think that what has been achieved in June this year with social spending, with the strategy on social spending, is absolutely transformative for the fund. And this is where we should be seeking more inspiration, and then going back to your point, turning into practical guidance to our mission chiefs and our program teams. There is already some good work. I got a brief with examples. For example, one of the good examples is Jamaica, attention to social spending to youth, specifically to youth. And I believe we certainly can and must do more on that. How to get women to be more economically empowered? Obviously by removing the barriers that are holding women back. There are legal barriers. There are conscious and unconscious biases. And who is our best help? Technology. Because digital payments, access to digital accounts, allows women to get wealth and build wealth much more easily than it is when you go to a teller and the teller sees you're a woman. At the World Bank, we had a great story, Bangladesh, pushing payments, salaries, and benefits to be delivered digitally. And a woman there tells me, before you did that, I would get my salary on a weekly basis in cash. My mother-in-law would wait in front of the factory and take it from me. Now it comes electronically, can't touch it. The woman was saving money and actually becoming an entrepreneur. So technology is very, very powerful. Public pressure, very powerful. And I must admit, role models, very powerful. What is so amazing is that the evidence is categorical that companies that are led by women or have women on their boards do better. And the most recent analysis says 8 to 11% better. So what is not to like? But we have to have no illusion. It's not going to be easy. To a certain degree, women are their worst. We are our worst enemies. Very often we undersell ourselves, undervalue our skills and capabilities. So work to be done. And with this, we turn to, I forgot which side.
I think this side.
Can I?
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up of the first question that we had. You know, this risky, very volatile kind of money going to the bonds, etc. So I followed up of one of your research at the IMF, tried to find out what was happening with African bonds and how it got done completely into investment funds. So my question is, and actually one of the conclusions was also, we have to deal with the capital controls.
Yep.
So my question is whether you would be willing to kind of reinvigorate the discussion also at the national level, because I think with Argentina, you see now that they have to do it. Secondly, also to bring it into the discussion on sustainable development, because if you have the flows going in and out, there's no way that you can make sure that this is sustainable. So that's one of my questions.
Yep, thank you.
Well, I happen to have a very related question. So I'm a consultant and social innovator from Argentina, member of the Latin American organization dedicated to strengthening democracy, fighting corruption, and empowering young political leaders. I must ask you, I'm sorry, since I believe it will have a transcendent impact in our region and in our country, what is your personal vision of the Argentine economy as a case, a chronic case, God knows, and its relation with the IMF, and also of the Latin American region regarding economic growth and democratic institutions? Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Nabil. I'm from Oxfam. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, what is your personal vision for how the IMF can roll out an agenda to help countries reduce economic inequality? And the other question that I have is, you being from the other side of the Iron Curtain, what would you do in order to, on the issue of civic space, especially when in countries where IMF has programs and the countries are using IMF programs to crack down on civic space? Will you commit to speak up when this happens? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, yes, Kevin Chen. I'm the chief economist of Horizon Financial, also a New York University professor. And I have two questions. One is about the negative interest rate. So in Europe or in Japan, I mean, we have had lower and lower interest rate. And, you know, in human history, thousands of years, never happened. What's your comment, or what would you do to deal with negative interest rate? I mean, it's creating more and more wealth gap, I guess, globally. First question. Second question is, I mean, now obviously we're in a global trade war, and Ray Dalio of Bridgewater talked about we're eerily like 1930s, like between world wars, and trade war is a war too. What would IMF do to reduce the tension globally, whether, you know, U.S.-China trade war, European Union, and all those? Thank you.
So let me take those, and then I'll come back to one more round. It's a very, very important question about volatility and rapid movements of capital that can put the country, bring a country to its knees. And what can be done about that? The IMF actually has worked on that question and came up with an institutional position on how to address it. And it is, I think, a really well-balanced position. It is not ideological. It doesn't say you never do it. It doesn't say you always do it. And I think the best the IMF can do is to be situation-specific, but also to raise its voice, as it is actually doing right now, on the risks to more vulnerable countries of policies that are taken by advanced economies and the spillover impacts of these policies. I personally have no ideological bent on this at all. And I would be very keenly interested to get deeper in understanding this institutional view, but then also working with staff of the fund to assess it in the context of what is happening today, which takes me actually to the last question, if I may, on negative interest rates. Now, we have to recognize that negative interest rates are not, they have done service to the world economy. Low interest rates, negative interest rates. If we didn't have that monetary easing, it would have been worse. We would have had more people without jobs, more difficulties. This being said, prolonged period of low and negative interest rates grounded in what? In very low productivity growth. I mean, productivity is not really helping in countries with demographics that is what it is, aging populations. This is something that you ask experts, they say that may last for a long time. But there are some negative consequences. There are risks that come from these low interest rates. The one that we are outlining in our report for the meetings is more risk-taking. And that takes us to what happens in Africa or low-income countries in Asia. How come they get into these bizarre Euro bonds that you look at the structure and you say, why did you do that? Well, truth is, we have financial agents that are seeking higher yield. They go to countries and say, interest rates are low, now is the moment to borrow, you miss on this moment, you miss. What can the fund do? And the fund is actually doing quite a lot of that. Put in place stronger debt management capacity in countries and be more forthcoming in analyzing these flows and speaking loud and clear of the danger for economies that fall for that yield in this yield trap. There are also distributional impacts from low interest rates. What we committed from the fund is to put more attention and resources on looking into this question of prolonged negative to low interest rates and be more calibrated in what advice we are offering, not only globally, but more specifically to countries that are, especially those that are faced with more difficulties. And just to finish with this last question on trade. So at the fund, we are in favor of trade peace. We think it works much better. There is now what I would call trade truce, and it is likely to help. We are saying 0.8% loss, but if truce holds, it would be 0.6% loss. Well, loss nonetheless. So we want peace. That's the short and the long is. How do we call for peace? We speak loud and clear about the negative impact on the world economy and on national economies. And basically we tell people everybody loses in a trade war. Some lose more than others. Apparently behavior economics says if you lose more than me, that makes me a happy person. I think this is nuts. I mean, I also lose. But that on a serious note, we actually think that right now in this downturn, the number one priority has to be to strive for fair trade, to restore the ability of trade to inject growth and create jobs for people. On the economy of Argentina, obviously, the country has had a number of these boom and bust cycles, in some cases with the IMF working on trying to get out of that. There are those who know Argentina very well, much better than me, would say there are some root causes that actually lead to political directions that impact policies. The fund is not in politics, but we also don't live outside of the realm of how countries function. And what we are very, very keenly committed to is to strive to find a way in which we can be helpful to Argentina, to the Argentinian people. And I think it would be fair to say that by the nature of the work of the fund, we come when things are really, usually we come when things are really very difficult. There are no easy solutions very, very often. Most of the time, replacing bad policies with good policies ultimately makes people better off. My own country, mid-90s, we had hyperinflation. My mother lost 98% of her life savings eaten by inflation. For the next 5 years, she so much didn't trust banks that any money she has, she would put it under the mattress. But now Bulgaria is then we got currency board. That was like immunization. Bulgaria now has very sound monetary standing and record high savings of the population, nearly 50% of GDP. So bad policies can be replaced by good policies and people to be better off. And we will strive for that everywhere, including in Argentina. And I would not get into the, there was a part of the question about growth in Latin America and institutions in Latin America. We are kind of running tight on time. It's a long, long conversation. So maybe what I can do is to invite you to actually get with Alejandro Werner, our Director for Latin America, and have a more in-depth discussion on that. So let's go to the next round.
Hi, my name is Nishad Mirza, and I work for youth from Brooklyn and Bangladesh from the United Nations. So first of all, thank you for being there for the women around the world. And my question is Bangladesh and youth. So as Bangladesh graduates from the least developed status, so how do you measure the success of poverty eradication? And what's the role of youth in civil society, especially in alleviating poverty? And how IMF is working with the young generation and what more they can do?
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Anna. I'm from Global Voices in Australia, a youth non-for-profit organisation. So I'm echoing some very similar comments there. As I guess more young people are becoming disengaged and disenfranchised with government and multilateral institutions, it would be very interesting to hear your perspective of how the IMF wants to engage with young people involved in making more effective sort of programs and policies, and I guess more generally involvement at the annual meetings. As a young person, we're sort of far and few between, so encouraging more youth involvement to ensure that they're not only, young people aren't just at the table, but they're actually a key part of the decisions that are being made. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcos Lopez, Senior Economic Justice Advisor for Christian Aid. IMF, as my colleague has said before, IMF is back in Latin America, and what we are hearing from the streets in Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, and Haiti is that people is not happy with this return. So do you really believe, is it possible to have any coherency between the structural adjustments that IMF is recommending and the inclusion and inequalities narratives that we are hearing from IMF here? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Nunn, unhealthy commodities, including alcohol, are actually adding up to the disease burdens in low and middle income countries. And last year, the World Health Organization actually issued data which indicates that every 10 seconds, a person dies of alcohol-related causes, which includes cancer, heart diseases, violence, root crash, and death. So my question is, what is the fund's policy in relation to lending to the alcohol industry? That is one. And two, what is the fund going to do to assist countries to adopt price and tax measures to raise resources to finance and reduce alcohol harm? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shyam Sundaram. I'm with Alberta Advisors. I have a question about disaster relief, or IMF's role in disaster relief. So, two parts. The first is, vis-a-vis other organizations, the World Bank, the UN, bilateral donors, as a former commissioner yourself, what is the right role for the IMF in supporting countries that are hit by disasters? And the second is, how can the IMF ensure that its actions don't lead to further cycles of illness down the line? Thanks.
Yep.
My name is Premaratna from Sri Lanka. I saw the IMF doing a lot of things in the agenda, climate changes, and macroeconomics thing. But the next few years, one of the serious issues come in the aging population. I didn't see any in the publication, anything. Are you going to do something, or what are you going to do? If not, why are you not going to do?
Okay. Hi, my name is Mutaka Yusau, a research fellow with the International Trade Union Confederation. My question is, what would be your commitment to ensure that the lending operation of the bank ensures respect for collective bargaining and labor standards and ensures living wages? That is my question. Thank you.
Yep.
Good afternoon. My name is Stella. I'm a Humphrey Fellow from Mozambique. Throughout the week, we have been hearing in the sessions around digitalization and fintech that central banks are running behind digital transformation evolution. So I would like to understand what is the plan of the IMF to help central banks around the world to pace up, especially in developing countries, pace up with digital transformation. Thank you.
Yep. And last question.
Very last one. Again, from Oxfam, my name is Nadia Dar, and I engaged with you a lot when you were at the World Bank, and looking forward to continuing that engagement with the IMF. I head our Washington, D.C. office, and I just wanted to remind you to please answer the question on how your vision for rolling out an agenda on reducing inequality in the countries you're operating in, and if you'll be able to speak up when there are crackdowns on civic space in countries where things are related to the IMF programs. Thanks.
Thank you. So, young people and what the IMF can do to include your voice. I'm just about to lose mine. What we are very interested in the research we do is to see what is it that policies in countries help societies to be more inclusive not only for gender, but young people, the elderly. And then how can we take this and make it digestible in advice that comes through surveillance, Article 4, and in programs. And I can say there have been some good examples. Usually what happens is a research is done, somebody in the fund gets really excited about it, takes it to implementation, and back to your point. And the really big struggle is to make it not pilot and one-off case, but to get it through the whole work of the fund. What is done very much through capacity development for the staff of the fund, but most importantly through the capacity development that the fund provides, is to lift up these issues and make this policy advice integrated in policies. I want to see the fund being more youthful itself. In other words, being more aggressive to hire young people, not forever, but they come, they jazz up the fund, they go to do something else. And that actually, believe it or not, when institutions absorb in their own on what they advise governments to do, there is a higher probability it would get done. Now, I am a very bad example in this regard because actually the governors changed the age limit so I can be hired here. But I'll tell you, for those of us that are closer to my age, when I didn't know that the fund doesn't allow over 65 to run for managing director. Once I knew, I walked up the wall. Then I knew I was going to fight to get this job because this is discrimination, cannot exist. So, I am very mindful that in many places the image of the IMF is we drop on governments painful adjustment programs, and then we hold them with money to do what is in these programs. That is actually very, very much no more, if it has ever been exactly that, the case. We want to provide financial resources for programs that governments themselves believe are the right programs for the countries. And we certainly are very keen and often urge, and I can tell you I'm doing that, we urge governments to pay more attention to the most vulnerable, to people who are falling behind in societies. But the fund is not a huge organization. We don't have big teams that go and spend months and months in countries. So we have to trust our partners in governments. And I take your point very strongly that we also have to do more to bring the voice of citizens, of civil society, the monitoring that comes from civil society organizations to help us do a better job. We don't lend to projects per se, so we don't fund wine production or beer production. The fund provides support through the budget of governments, and usually with some agreement what the money should go for. But we do have a way to influence tax policies, and especially tax policies that would be improving health outcomes. Taxing alcohol at a higher level, I'm sure in the fund programs there are conditions like that to discourage what is killing people and to encourage what is good for people's health. And taking your question, I would express interest with my colleagues to learn a little bit more about what we do with tax measures to create the right incentives for healthy living. On disaster relief, the role of the fund is threefold. One, to provide financial resources to countries when they are devastated by a disaster. Two, to help countries with especially climate assessments, to assess climate risks. And three, to help countries build buffers, budgetary buffers, so they can withstand shocks more easily. And the whole concept of shock absorbance in countries is something the fund does. I just came from a meeting with the Pacific Island countries, and this is what we talked about, how we can help more in climate risk reduction, resilience building through the policies we support. On aging population, I think we have done a study for the Japanese presidency that was on that very topic. I think I need to on demographics, and basically the fund is interested in demographics, in aging population as well as youth, both because they have macroeconomic consequences. And it is indeed an area where you probably would see the fund doing more, just because you take a country like Japan or many countries in Europe, my own country, shrinking. This is clearly a significant macro relevant issue. It is also significant for gender equality because aging populations even more need female labor market participation. On the question of labor standards and collective bargaining, again, because these are not like World Bank does lending operations where they can include these conditions. I'm not sure how the fund handles labor standards, environmental standards. I know that work is being done to identify what is good practice, but how exactly that fits into programs, I am actually not in a position today to tell you. Central banks. We are actually very much focused on digitalization, stable coins, central banks issuing digital currencies, under what conditions, and how that can be best managed. And I met with our team today. Their focus is on especially emerging markets, developing countries, and what they can do not to fall behind. In fact, this is an opportunity to leapfrog. We have seen it in some countries. FinTech in Kenya, for example, made inclusion, financial inclusion, a reality through M-Pesa. And I think the work in that regard actually links to the next question of what we do on inequalities. Because the very best way to tackle inequalities is to provide equal opportunities to people, whether they are minorities, handicapped, with no access to good education. What the fund tries to do is to press on that equal opportunity societies through the programs, through the policy advice we provide. Inequality, unfortunately, in many countries has grown over the last years. And what my predecessor, Christine Lagarde, has done is to look squarely into that problem in the face and recognize that economies cannot succeed if they're fragmented and if inequality grows. What would I do? What my pledge on that would be? Twofold. One, you would see me relentlessly pressing the staff of the fund to answer a simple question. Where is growth going to come from, and how we make sure that benefits of growth are shared in a fair, equal manner. And I very much believe that people in the fund are fantastic. You know, they, at the World Bank, the boss of the bank says something, very decentralized organization. You say something, people say, what? At the fund, the advantage of being actually highly centralized is that you say something and the army lines up and marches forward. So hopefully we would see that happening. And the second thing you would see me doing is relentlessly pressing for more attention to fragile states, because this is where the most vulnerable people live and where poverty is on the rise. So with this, we took a little bit long of your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you all very much. See you soon. Thank you. Yes.